Hello, everyone. Welcome back to Radio Free Golgotha. It's lovely to be back. It's lovely to be in your ears. Hi.
It's very violating.
Happy feast of Cosmos and Damian, everyone. I hope you are enjoying your day. And,
or night.
Or night, yeah.
Or twilight.
Or eve.
Or
crepuscular.
Or your Adam.
Mm-hmm.
Yes. Cosmas and Damian. Cosme and Damian.
Who are the patrons of this podcast as well, at least this episode.
This was not in our contract.
They are now.
They are now. A plethora of feast days, 25th, 26th, 27th, November 1st, October something. There's a lot of them.
Yeah, right around here. Yeah. Because we had that last year, where I was like, oh, are we ready for it? And you're like, it's not yet.
But pre-Vatican II says it is.
But Wikipedia says.
Yeah.
No.
And this is not to not have a Cyprian episode, because we've had a Cyprian episode. It's
been in the chamber.
It's just been in the chamber.
Slowly.
It might be out now.
Slowly percolating.
But
which would be cool, because it would be twinsy episodes. One of them about some holy, occasionally, often referred to, depicted as twins. And it'd be nice
I like this word, Neelish. Occasionally.
Occasionally.
Acacia.
of the acacia.
Of the acacia.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, Cosmas and Damian are the twin saints, the twin doctor saints, which we'll get into shortly. But welcome to our horribly level recorded podcast full of charming bullshit.
We take a very, woodsy DIY approach, as you know, hopefully, if it's your first one. Hello. Thanks for coming. So if it is your first one, we take a Sesame Street approach to things that interest us. So this week brought to you by the demon Serguthy from the good Grimorium Verum.
And its corresponding Exu Mirim, the child Exu.
Also brought to you by the plant, or in this case, plant tree. Poplar.
Trees are plants too, Al.
Hashtag yes, all trees.
Yes.
Oh.
Also
brought to you by the stone Pyrite. Pyrite.
Wow. Okay, and the style of magic is dice magic today. Mm-hmm. Which, yes, Al likes to pronounce dice or DK or dice. I'm not sure, depending on what type of food he's had before he gets here.
I say.
Yeah.
How you do Roman vaudeville comedy.
Oof. The geomantic figure today is Puer, which is the little boy's penis.
The boy, the child, the young warrior, the young hero, is occasionally called as well. Yeah.
And we'll flash in some cross-cultural Ifa Odu of Irete, and the magician today is Thricefold, which was really looking at, because there's a theme you'll sense from today of children and twins and things going through that will be evident, but the Three Child Seers. So it allows us to talk of child seery, not apple Siri, wow, but child seerness, mercenaric, made up word out. But the Three Child Seers, who are the three children who saw the Virgin of Fatima. And so it allows the lovely ignoble tradition of making children do your dirty work for you.
Yep.
Yeah. Passing the blame on the little ones.
Yeah. And they say the darndest things.
They do. But I am your daughter. Okay. So, shall we start with Cosmo and Damian?
Yeah. We normally start with the Saints. I think that's a good way to lead.
Why fix a broken wheel that's still rolling?
But is it downhill?
Yeah.
All the way.
No one asked you for your exceptional wisdom today, Al.
This is my new favourite compliment and simultaneous insult.
Yes.
Because I require both at the same time.
Slap the baby, coddle the baby. Slap the baby, coddle the baby. So Cosmo and Damian are very popular saints, especially in Latin America and in the Eastern Orthodox tradition. End of September, feast days in Roman calendar. There are 3 sets of them in Orthodoxy. 3 sets of twins. What?
Wow.
Just to confuse us, probably from the fact that even in pre-Golden Legend era, we just don't know anything about these 2 brothers.
Yeah.
That are by tradition physicians, but like we know very little about them. And then the Golden Legend kind of explodes from there, as the Golden Legend often does. It gives us the golden showers of information.
Right. Again, one of those things that combines extant lore, but that we generally tend to, that generally tends to be cited as the popularizer and the compiler of like this encyclopedic hagiography, and certainly also with Jacob of Voragine, Voragine. I don't know how that's said. Voragine. His etymology, we were just discussing earlier before we press record, is almost Kenneth Grant-esque in terms of like bouncing around different interpretations of the name, which is explicitly what he's going for. He's not trying to give the most accurate take. He's trying to give the most evocative take on what these saints' mysteries are about. So the Golden Dawn does give us some.
It's the Golden Legend and early yellow journalism.
Oh God, yeah! I almost said the Golden Dawn there. Yeah, the gold. Yes, exactly. It combines some tabloidy stuff. Gives it the sexy stories about being cast into the great fire or thrown into the sea as well, or crucified and stoned and shot with arrows and beheaded. Because twins like evil never dies apparently.
And Rasputin, yeah.
And Rasputin, indeed. So there's this combination of some new glosses on extant or an far older material. But yeah, we know very little, and this notion that they are doctors or physicians, healers, right? But specifically not simply miraculous healers with great knowledge.
Mm-hmm.
And I just learned also related to healing animals as well.
Yes, so that they are credited, and there's just as we might be familiar, you and I have no idea when anyone listens to this podcast, with kind of crediting grimoires to famous people who were magicians, like Solomon or Cyprian or things like this, that many medical cures from the Middle Ages were invented by Cosmas and Damian, as a way of validating the cure.
Become patrons of that.
Yeah, so especially early pills and the electuary.
Oh yeah.
Honey dough lozenge thingy,
right.
Pasty thing.
Right. So not just medicine in terms of, not that there's anything just about, green craft of like this plant can cure this thing, but specifically the preparations of those things,
yes.
the reducing to powders, the effort that goes into that, the preparation of something that vivifies it or specifies its use for something.
And I like the documentation too, that they're often depicted like showing holding alchemical equipment, but in truth I believe they're actually looking at a urine diagnosis jar.
Uroscopy.
Yeah, so
right.
like it's still whatever the current in vogue medicine of the day, they are the patrons of.
Right.
And also it's quite interesting because they are believed to be doing things for charity, which is one of the reasons they're a saint. They healed for the glory of God and for the health of creation, to right the wrongs of the devil and his minions, according to lore. But it is that kind of carefree attitude and charity work that brings them into the fore.
I think it's interesting when they're depicted as, so we were looking earlier, the first line of their entry in the Golden Legend is that they were brethren germain, that is, of one father and of one mother, which sounds like a very roundabout way of saying at the very least they were brothers, if not twins, if that word wasn't being used at that time, or they just wanted a fancy way of putting it. So I like them when they're depicted differently. They look like a kind of like a medical buddy cop movie. That's kind of nice about it. Or brother cop movie. I don't know if that's happened before. It must have. But I also like when they're depicted like identical as well.
Mm-hmm.
Especially like the slightly creepy, very gothy eyeshadow that they have in their depiction in the statue of their statues in the Most Precious Blood Church in Little Italy here in New York. They look kind of creepy. I like it.
I think also it's they have a history heavily of being churches named after them in Latin America because of tropical climate. and the diseases that come
Oh.
with tropical climate. So I don't know if they're as popular in Anglicanism. And being you the only de facto authority at Anglicanism that's within, but this is always the thing, right? The tropical climate has different diseases and its relationship to plants and winter and what that is. That
Right.
I always find that fascinating. That with no winter means that insects don't die, and therefore plants develop toxins in order to deal with the fact that they're constantly under attack, which means the tropics just become horrifically different. Tropical herbalism is different because of this. But the oldest church in Brazil is dedicated to Cosmas and Damian.
Oh, really?
1530s. And then the syncretization with different spirits in Latin America with Cosmas and Damian is always of interest. So to me, the statues that you see of Cosmas and Damian in Brazil are of two identical figures, oftentimes with a triplet in there.
Oh, yeah?
Which is the Ibeji, the twin deities with Edu, the child who comes after to satiate them. So this is similar to the whole thing that two is always three, that there's two are one thing, so it invokes the third, but then also the child that is born after twins satiates the heat of twins, and that twins themselves in specifically Yoruba culture, which influences so much of the Brazilian Afro-Caribbean traditions of being a cursed thing at first. They were the children of the monkey. The monkey cursed a farmer for destroying its nest, and the woman bore two children the way monkeys do. And this being a sign that it's a soul too big for one body, that they're like little godlings, that you're just like, this is terrifying. They're half monkey.
It's bestial, yeah.
Yeah, and the woman had to bear a mini litter, and like, this is not helpful. To when the historical King Shango, Alafina Voyo, had twins, that suddenly the reversal comes and they become a blessing. They represent multiplicity, abundance, multiplying
prosperity,
things in this way. And which, I mean, they might as well, because they're going to eat twice as much as one child. But you have twice the labor force, which is its own thing. But that this given to fire and water that happens, I do love just working off that Ibeji lore of the twin that comes out first is actually the younger twin who was kicked out of the womb by the older twin who said, go check out what's out there. And if you don't come back, I'll follow you. So the younger twin to come out is associated with fire and that impetus and that pulling out, and associated with, and under the protection of Shango, it is said, the Orisha of fire, but is the younger of the twins, and the second twin is actually the older twin, and is associated with Yemaya, the deity of motherhood, nurturing, and in the diaspora, saltwater. Not that all twins are automatically Shango and Yemaya. The twins still have their individual identities, but twins are a patronage under the twin deity. You'll also see the carvings of Ibeji, Ere Ibeji, which are, if a twin dies, one of the dolls must be carried either by the living twin or by the mother. And if twins die in general, then the mother will carry wooden dolls for the rest of their life. And the dolls are dressed, they're given food, they are brought to the table like living people. And so the cult of Ibeji is in Nigeria and Benin is very noted. And the Ibeji themselves, which means two or born to, is fairly common spread in Santeria and in Candomblé. Just this idea that they are the beloved of all the Orishas because everybody's got to tolerate them. Like it's the little children running around that just cause havoc.
Right.
But the lore of twins associated with Cosmas and Damian in both, because they're actually twins, the Himaguas or the Gemelos or whatever you want to call them, in Cuba become the Ibeji, and in Brazil become Ibeji. And so the Brazilian lore, there's huge feasts in Rio de Janeiro, in Bahia for the Ibeji as Cosmas and Damian, and feasts where children have to eat first, and only after the children are done can adults eat. Yeah. This type of Ibeji party is very common in the diaspora. But yeah, I think there's just the associations with it are very interesting.
Yeah. All sorts of, the chicken and rice, and the idea of having to wipe your fingers, having to eat it with your hands,
getting messy,
getting messy.
Anything that causes stains is sacred to that day, like the deities. So like Cheetos and like sticky candies and things like that. Things that make your presence known through your enjoyment, which is loud and obnoxious, and that's its own thing.
But means as they're running around that the whole palace has to raise them. Right?
Yes, absolutely, and just even the mythology of it being that Shango had these children by either Oshun or Oya, and people think it's Oya sometimes because she's wild and because she's an animal-like deity, that she has a litter and that only she could have a litter like that. Or Oshun, because she's the favored lover, and that whoever the mother is, we most likely Oshun, gives them up, and the stepmother or the mother of Shango raises them, Imaya, and so they become under her patronage. And that the next child Oshun has, Idu, is the one she never lets leave her arms, and this is the prized little spoiled child, because he is water child that satiates the heat of the womb being ripped open for two twins. But twins are considered one soul too big for one body, and therefore if one twin dies, that person, half of them is in the other world, and their responsibility must be shifted there. The other twin must be placated and satiated, or it causes problems in the family. Dead twins in the family are definitely a thing. And twins run in the family too, so you can see the kind of recurring patterns that happen. No, it's a very interesting set of saints, and as far as multiplicity and multiplying things, and I do like the charity aspect, especially when we're dealing with any child spirits, child deities. We know that it's going to be somewhat problematic, perhaps.
Right. That there's not just the two of them, so it's double the childlikeness and double the childishness.
Yes.
Yeah, that's really interesting.
You had mentioned we were talking about it earlier, but the record of Bishop Neri in Brazil in the state of Espírito Santo, which is end of the 19th century, early 20th century, talking about a practice known as Kabbalah, where there are tables erected to St. Barbara, the Virgin Mary, and Cosmas and Damian, and the one that serves at Cosmas and Damian's altar is dressed all in black, from head to toe, and it seems to be an echo of syncretic practices where the child spirits and the spirits of the woods are served through Cosmas and Damian. And Umbanda-wise, Candomblé-wise, we see and Quimbanda-wise, we see this relationship between the twin saints, Cosmas and Damian, with not only the Ibeji, but the child spirits in general, the Ere and the mediums and meninas of Quimbanda as well, which is an interesting kind of parallel, or egress out of one, ingress into the other.
Would that include the the kawaii versions of like Capriña and the way way that a Mavambo can express itself as a child version of its older self?
Yes, although I do think you said caipirinha, which is a drink, as opposed to capinha, which is a little black cape. But yeah, no, that I could use a caipirinha right now. Yes, that you have this idea that even in the ere phase, which is a stage of possession that happens in some lines, it's childish, that it's that giggly phase, especially when you're coming out of possession, that sometimes it's the person is mostly back, but there's just like something, the Bahavento is still there, the current, the wind is still there, and ere is like a child phase of the possession. So there are stories of someone mounts a very fierce Orisha, and the ere phase comes, and now they're a little blustering child who's fierce. And it speaks similar to me, or reminds me of like the origin of satire, that like after a Greek play, a tragedy, the horrible things that are happening, that a bunch of naked men run around with horsetails up their butts and reenact the whole play to kind of purge you of it. Yeah. But ere phase is like what happens when the spirit's leaving the body and we go childish. Now there are some people that get possessed by the ere phase, and that's what they get possessed by, and it's not fully a full spirit or something like that. It's something different. Yeah, so Quimbanda has Mirim, which is one spirit that is legion and is mirroring all other Eshus, can therefore walk as a Mirim, or Mirim can walk as all other Eshus, depending which way you look at it. But like the Mirim that is the child version of Brasa is Brasinha. The Mirim that is the child version of Caveira is Caveirinha. And they're like, little angry children versions of their larger Eshu counterparts. And similarly, mercenarily, there is Menina, who is the Pombagira version of these junior versions, and so she comes qualified in different kingdoms or different versions of other Pombagiras that are now in their kind of ere phase. So you can see in reading through different lines of Umbanda, Candomblé, Batuque, this settling of what is known as ere or Ibeji or Mirim or Menina in these different forms, where it all kind of merges. But yeah, so Mirim is interesting. I believe Mirim is the Tupi word for child.
Okay.
Which is where it comes from, as opposed to Menino, which is child, boy, child. Menina, which is girl, child. Asu, it's a little flaming baby. Vasinia type of thing, the strange.
Right, and we can talk about how, cute they can be when they turn up and they get served with, Coca-Cola and things like that. But also there is evoked there the sense of, like, babies that didn't make it.
Yes.
And again, that, like, what happens to the potential for a life that didn't get to live the whole thing.
Mm-hmm.
And also that a child is closer to the dead because they've just come out of that world into this one.
Yeah. I think the relationship between Abiku and Egbe and all these other concepts of the child that is born to die or the heavenly companions and what that means, there's a lot of mysteries there with birth phenomena. And the Abeji, although we talk about them as born to, they are the most popular example of the miraculous children. The Abeji are a whole class of child spirits that have birth phenomena associated with it. Aina, who is the child with the cord wrapped around the throat. The different ones, Ideu, who's born after twins. And depending on where you are, different names given to whether it's everything from birth order to just qualities of your birth. Whereas the cord wrapped around, do you have hair on your head, which would link you to the Da? Are you born butt first or foot first or things like that are considered markers on how you're entering the world, gives qualifiers on which spirits, which deities protect you or need to be propitiated. But the idea of Egbe, which is the heavenly companions, it's like almost like a club, but there are agreements made before you come down into this world that might link you to other people who are here to be the pestery little children running through the hallways.
Right.
And so I think there's something interesting with that.
Yeah, circumstances around your birth,
Mm-hmm.
or even when one is born, what one is like, are markers for the potential life that they might lead or the role they might play in a community.
Yeah, wrapped in the caul, born dead,
Feet first,
all those different things.
Mm-hmm.
But in the grand syncretization of Grimorium Verum, Mirim is related to Serguthy,
Mm-hmm.
and I will happily ask you, Al, who is Serguthy?
Serguthy, that's an excellent question, Jesse. Thank you very much.
Is also what was the other name that you said was linked to him?
Oh, through the German Honorian texts, manuscripts linked to.
Was that an after plural?
Yeah, it was. I was pronouncing the little slash at the end. He's also linked to Citri, who's also called Bitru, or even Bitter, or Biter, however that is said. Bitru as well. So Serguthy is one of 4 spirits under Satanakia, not Satanakia's first set of spirits, but rather what I've been terming their second line. In terms of guilds, and the way I think about them, they're very much the Professor's Guild. They're very much all teachers of magic. We have Heramael, who teaches plant stuff, Trimasail, who does alchemy and the powders of projection, it is said. We have Sestubriel, who grants familiars, which is sometimes, in some texts, that's grants mandrakes, specifically. But then we come to Serguthy. All of those others, you give familiars, you know how to use plants, and you know how to make powders and do alchemy. They're all very explicitly teachers of magic. Serguthy's kind of an odd one out in these circumstances because they are said to have power over maidens and wives. So they're another amorous spirit, we could say. There's definitely love magic and aphrodisiac stuff there. Power over them also seems to me to be about fertility, which we get in a lot of the goetic spirits that are to do with causing someone to fall in love, and can also cause barrenness, and cause and lift barrenness, even in some texts.
I wonder if there's a certain amount of like the capriciousness of certain spirits that is a quote unquote non-male trait in popular mindset, and certainly in the male magicians that are reading the books as being the literate class of who they are. but it seems to be a common thread of women and children always being linked, and not that Serguthy is child, and I'm just the association with Midi makes my head go there.
No, absolutely, yeah. It's maidens and wives, which I think is also worth pondering on, as distinct from just saying women. So it's clearly that we're, the most obvious one I think is that we're talking about,
Fertile.
your mistress as well as your spouse. If the connection to Citri is accurate, and just because one or a couple of German texts say they're the same spirit, don't make it so. But if they are, then that's worth looking at as well. And Citri specifically is said to inflameth a man with a woman's love, and also stir up women to love men. Being commanded, he willingly detaineth secrets of women, laughing at them and mocking them, to make them luxuriously naked, and there obey him.
What is luxurious nudity?
Well, luxury is sin.
Okay.
The root is...
So it's not an innocent sin, nudity.
No. Okay. No. So
it's like, are we talking filters or...
right? No. This is a difficulty in things that Peter and Kika of Scarlet Imprint have talked about a lot, that we mistake the idea of the luxury as sin for luxury as opposing, as advocating an asceticism of some kind, which is not necessarily, which is read onto the texts. There's,
Yes.
A variety of Christian texts.
Well, there's the idea that gluttony is not just of food.
Right.
That anytime you take more than you need, that it is gluttonous, and therefore luxury in that sense. I can see that natural pairing extension.
Yeah. Citri's also one of the ones that is said to have the wings of a griffin, which always confuses me, in terms of like you said, are we talking eagle wings then, or is there something about griffin's wings that's different in medieval heraldry? It might be a positioning thing, in which case is the potential to talk about the elephant with its tail up versus down? Does the because certainly heraldically speaking, how the animal is standing definitely informs something about what it's doing, right? So is it this is my latest notion that I'm trying to explore, is this getting at the wings are held in a particular way that indicates something about its wingedness? Is it that it moves quickly, or casts a wider span over something? I don't know. One of the things to ponder.
I always like as an aside, the griffin gold connection, that their eggs make gold, that where they lay their eggs, there's gold. And then that lovely material justification that happens of the gold deposits where griffins are said to have been in history are places where there's beaked dinosaur fossils. And this is explained this way, and then other people are that's not true of everything. Right. If you look at as far as Eastern Mediterranean art, griffins are a very common cryptid. And this is zoomorph the other term?
Yeah, theriomorph.
Yeah.
Zoomorph. Those might have technical distinctions. I don't know them if they do have.
Cryptid is like when you're hunting them with night vision cams on TV, I think. But they often didn't have wings in some of the depictions, especially Mycenaean art.
Oh yeah.
And Cretan art that they don't Cretan art do not necessarily have wings, but they can. That the head alone was enough to see it, that it was an eagle, but it wasn't an eagle. It was an eagle with those weird ears. Some tufted eagles have those weird ears, so I don't know, whatever weird giant bird was floating around the Eastern Mediterranean.
The other feature of Serguthy, to complete a very short entry in Verum, is that it's said that they can influence or have power over wives and maidens, or maidens and wives, when things are favourable. So there's this, which is sometimes, I think, I'm spacing on the direct one, but that's sometimes teaching you when they're favourable. So there's an element of timing going on here.
Your wife's in a good mood. Go talk to her.
Right.
Is that what we're...
potentially, yeah. Knowing when things are right. I think it might. I think a lot of the time those lusty spells or workings with unclean spirits, as I said, also include this notion of when is the right time of the month to not conceive, as well as when it is right to conceive. So that's so there's fertility, and there's also the fertility of various forms of natural contraception. I think is something going on there. So when things are favourable, depending on what it is you're trying to do or not do.
definitely, because the Mirim codification stuff is, I believe, 60s, but like that he comes in 49 flavors for the main 49 Eshus. And now no one limits Eshu to 49 anymore. This is a very imprint approximation of what was going on. And this is also around the time period you see the lines come into manifestation in Quimbanda as mirroring this kind of dark Umbanda. And the division is far less interesting in practice and also in history. That, you know, the practices are one that, as we've discussed many times, that Quimbanda is the word for the practitioner originally, and that as something became more African or worked low quote-unquote magic, there's the same divide that happens in every public magical thing. And I still, maybe I won't say my possible thesis there, but the high magic of spiritism, high table spiritism, of advancement and helping spirits find their place towards Mother, Father, God in heaven, is termed Umbanda, and anything low magic is termed Quimbanda, because the practitioner is who you go to see. The Quimbandero was originally just called Quimbanda, and this is appears to be not so casual racism. Just at play. And so now the division between what is Umbanda and Quimbanda is very, people have a lot of opinions, but I mean historically, that you know, Jesus didn't follow himself. There's the divisions, and the names are given later to classify different styles of practice, and
everything into sevens.
Yeah, that everything must follow this grand law of Umbanda as put forth by the Umbandistas post Celio Moraes, as opposed to the Umbanda that was already being written about and developed in 1860s and later, as Spiritism starts to influence Brazil. It gets very, very tricky. And going back to the kind of like Kabbalah practice of the tables being set up and people invoking and calling upon what in that time period would have been called Karunga, with an R instead of Kalunga. But the pulling the spirits through this and working with like different spirits that would come in known as tatas or yayas, and to be names like Seven Waterfalls or Bridge Breaker or Forest Stormer, these kind of folkloric names that we see most heavily in Eshus and Gobokos in practice eventually. So the roots of something are all there, and then books actually give evidence to, as well as codify, and then things start to look like, well, you must have these 49 flavors of Mirim, or it's not a Mirim.
Right.
Which one is he? And like, you know.
Is there a sense that 7 times 7 is a bit like that, like 10,000 things? That it's probably a term for this, a number that actually just connotes a multitude rather than its specific number.
Well, yeah, I mean, there's also the biblical reference to, a 77 times 7 type of playing on the sevens. There is always going to be this thing, and in a crossroads cult, with 7 being a crossroads number of northeast, southwest, up, down, and always returning to center. That 7 denotes mastery. 7 denotes totality. Which it has echoes of in the West of being the 7 planets and a complete cycle, which Umbanda notices and merges all those things together and validates itself through its own evidence.
Right.
Which, you know, if you read Kardec, he's very good at validating his own self through his evidence that he finds that validates himself.
Yeah.
You know, Spiritism is very good at that. It's not to bash Spiritism, but it is set up on a model that proves its existence by proving its existence.
Yeah.
The confirmation bias is very large.
And weaponizing that.
So Serguthy has none of the child associations necessarily?
Not explicitly, no. I don't think so. No. Even the naked of a related spirit that might well be the same spirit. Citri is explicitly said to be not like an innocent, like childlike nudity, but explicitly a sexualized, or at least
luxurious. But yeah, so Mirim, Cosmas and Damian, Serguthy, Trinity there, formed out of the feast. I think it's easy enough to, because with griffins being mentioned, but also the idea of potential in children, but it is not like like a Beji statue is what's interesting. We're talking about the life, allowing the life that could have been to be acknowledged. That Ibeji statues, since Ibeji are multiplicity and fertility, traditionally Ibeji statues are depicted with extremely developed genitalia. So a child now has adult penis and adult breasts. And why is that? Because they're included in the life, in the cycle that continues, and this type of thing. So it's that very non-representational art that messes with I think the Western mind looking at African art, but and rightly so. But the idea of it being that they are therefore an image, in the perpetual image, allowed to participate in society as mature individuals.
Yeah.
And therefore allowed to produce and produce increase for us.
Yeah.
But also, similarly, I think pyrite as a stone is very resonant with this concept of we call it fool's gold, which totally knocks pyrite as to what it is. It's still an extremely beautiful stone,
Right.
and has a history of being used in jewelry as mirrors. And then I find I think we talked about this on the last episode, but like where a stone is historically found and the lore from those areas.
Yeah.
So Incan mirrors that used pyrite, because it's heavily found in Peru. It's also heavily found in Spain and Italy. And because of its color, because of the way it looks, it is so considered solar. It is a stone that is, I believe, associated with the third chakra, and in the ancient documents of my library. But that pyrite itself has an interesting lore around it, that it almost seems like we're saying it's of less value because it's not gold.
Yeah. And
here's this gorgeous stone that has a complex lore.
Yeah, and I think it's well worth distinguishing it from what we think of as fool's gold, especially around like fairy gold, right? That which is only here briefly to fool. So it's not just you bought this expensive thing, but it's actually not as expensive as you thought it was. It's the notion that you bought this thing that will literally disappear in the morning. That's kind of conjured by calling it that, which seems, as you say, seems at odds. Certainly Lakuto's lapidary, Watermelon, gives a ton of different things that are called pyrite, or that we would call pyrite. A ton of them. Once you get into like virites or virites, a stone said to be identical to pyrite, but its brilliance is emphasized in terms of how shiny it is, and even it's said that it'll burn the hand of people that hold it for too long. As well. So even this quality of like, no, it isn't a solar stone because it's like gold. It's a solar stone because it expresses solar virtues, right? Similarly to the sun, but not in mimicry. Yeah, there's quite a few connections to things that Lakuto identifies as pyrite that aren't called so, with its fiery connections, that it's fractious, or that it also that there's a male stone and a female stone, and when they're brought together they catch fire. So rather than like, the gendering of lodestones that come together to produce prosperity, getting the gold to, or getting the money magnet to birth more money, that they catch fire. That there's this sense of like the flammability, why the country of the stone itself.
I find its use as a mirror in Peru fascinating. Just the idea of, which leads to the question of scrying and things like what that is, but the image of a mirror, so that any shiny surface. So you have obsidian mirrors in Central America and pyrite mirrors in South America as part of the Incan trade, and just the quality of that, the difference of a dark mirror versus I find that pairing of solar mirror, according to our classification, and a lunar or dark mirror.
So they would polish it.
Yes. Well, I mean, because it has its own
luster
as it is.
Sure.
Is that the word for reflectivity in a smart person world?
Not at all. No.
Okay.
Luster's like the fire. It just has a reflexivity. But I think a lot more about pyrite in terms of like looking like lots of glitter stuck together of like
in its crystalline form.
Yeah, exactly. Rather than it's like a flat surface that shines. And old mirrors aren't as reflective as new mirrors. So I think that's a big deal, right? That you're not seeing like an exact duplicate of your own face or of whatever you have next to the mirror. That it's blurred somewhat, or it's like affected by the natural imperfections of the surface, and so it's already slightly different from what you're seeing. And this notion of mirror, a scrying mirror not just being an exact copy of something. We deliberately, all these different techniques of scrying are all about like, do it with this bad lighting, bad in inverted commas there, like, so it doesn't look exactly like just looking in a mirror.
Yeah.
You're doing it in darkness, doing it, someone else doing it, and you only looking at what you're only hearing what they say they're seeing. Those kinds of things. The advantages of attempting to produce or incubate visual distortion in various ways. I think about that in terms of doing it in tiny surfaces as well, like with onychiomancy, like the anointing of your thumbnail or a child's thumbnail, and then asking them to look at that shiny surface. Like, it's small, it's going to mean that you can't see everything at once, I guess is one thing, but also that, like, this is another way of producing and again, this already sounds like I'm coming from some kind of materialist lens, but like it's distorting what you're seeing to produce something else. Now, is that a distortion, an imperfection, or a corruption of the thing, or is it just simply that you're realigning to get access to that thing that's more true, or real in a different way or a different place?
Well, I think the notion of refinement as it goes it's across the board. Ontogeny recapitulates phylogeny type of argument. That, the further go back, that things are going to be less clear, less articulated, and more alike. Certainly from a biological model, that's its own thing, but that mirror technology is fairly recent, and now that we use foil-backed glass, and it's not necessarily mercury glass anymore, and that a stone, anything that reflects light and increases the light in the room, is quite interesting. And the whole tradition of melong and shamanic mirrors, that a coin that is polished on one side is a mirror, and that wearing a coin has a lot of the lore of it because it also has a face on it, which is etched. But like, if it can reflect light in any way, which a newer coin can, then it automatically has this thing of stealing the image or containing an image. So like capturing spirits into crystals, is it, into coins, into mirrors,
right? All
those things are reflected. And pyrite emanates fire, but its use as a mirror is interesting because now it is a different thing. It is not just emanating light, but it is containing your own. Yeah,
that's a really good point. It doesn't appear to be a material substance that governs something you can scry with. It's the fact that it can glint and glimmer and shine, right? You get it with the polished swords, so we know we can do it with metal. You get it with like water, so we know it's not like even a solid. As well as things that can, as well as holding the evidence that we have from, say, William Lilly's autobiography of a bunch of different scries that he knew, including one who took his crystal of the bigness of a goodly orange, and holds it up to the light, goes outside, he's doing it literally in the field, and it's brought up to the sun. So it's not just that you should do it in daylight hours because of abstract timing, it's that you're literally like making the sun shine through this thing and kind of giving yourself a little, what do they call the kind of not like tracers in terms of psychedelics, but like leaving an imprint on the eye that you can still see when you shut your eye, like the brightness.
Oh, the after image.
Yeah, that kind of thing. Yeah. It seems you're like deliberately doing that, if not just watching the play of the light through the crystals. I don't even want to call them imperfections. Just
even like the dream machine technology, right? Of like simulating the light flickering through tree leaves. That it's that or ceiling fan type of flicker or whatever it is. But the early mirror technology with a flickering candlelight behind you is going to signify this very lead you to a similar experience. Signifying.
I think signify is okay. I know symbol is. I'm totally on board with symbol being a not useful term. But
I just think it's problematic that you have to predicate it a lot based on time period, cultural contextualization, and smart.
For sure, fair.
But do angels have free will, Al? We still have to do reviews of the conferences from this year, but Postmortem Power, Free Will of Angels, and Spain is still part of Europe, and other such gems are coming your way at some point if our memories serve us, which they don't. But
hopefully they things ferment in there, and
he's massaging invisible testicles when he says that. But
I spoke for 4 hours the other day, and boy, were my arms tired. I speak for 4 hours regularly in specific teaching context. It's not really that long,
You did fall asleep on the toilet last night.
Only very brief. It was a little micro nap, little window.
It was lovely.
It was a sweet moment of relief and bliss. But I'd been up pretty much continuously for a couple of days on some, working some ritual beers. The Three Child Seers make me think of the three good angels that also appear in crystals, just because there's three of them, except that there aren't always three of them. But I just wanted to lead with that.
Jump to the end of our list, I'll do it.
Yeah.
Okay, so if we're talking about the mirror of Pyrite and going on through Three Child Seers and appearing in crystals. So
they're seers because they see Fatima.
yes.
Right, they have a vision.
Yes.
Okay. So we think of...
Not because they were hired by someone to see her.
Right. They're not staring into a crystal or a mirror.
Lucia and her cousins, Jacinta and Francisco.
So they're witnesses. And which is interesting, right? The miracle is the apparition then, right?
Yes, the miracle is the apparition, and then there's if I remember correctly, like they were receiving communion from her, and like onlookers that would cloud to follow them saw the wafer appear on their tongue, like she was giving them prophecy, and there are the predictions of Fatima too, like the different visitations have prophecy associated with them. But Fatima is one of the most famous visions. It is the early 20th century. It's World War I, and then it took 15 years for them to be validated in the eyes of the church officially, which is actually pretty quick, even given the state of how things move.
And were they said to have done anything post the visions, other than like being very pious?
I know that they were interviewed and continued from. There's the secrets, right? So there's the first secret, which is the vision of hell. The second secret is a devotion to the Immaculate Heart of Mary, as a way to bring peace in the world and pray for the holy souls in purgatory. There was the weird prediction of the consecration of Russia. Remember, like that Russia was going to come,
what?
Yeah, and be okay and bring peace. I don't
consecrate the whole of Russia. That makes sense in terms of trying to affect global politics towards a good and happy end. That's at least a bit more practical than just thoughts and prayers, right?
Mm-hmm.
I just love the idea of it being a consecration of the whole space.
Well, that it would bring world peace through it, through the consecration of Russia.
Totally.
The third secret is the death of the Pope and other religious figures.
Ooh,
and
someone.
Flaming sword and all those types of things. And they have control over when the secrets are released. Mm-hmm. Like I think Lucia said that it was like after 1960 the third secret could be released. And it will be more clearly understood because the Virgin Mary wishes it so. Okay. Type of reality that
so they were slow releasing their visions.
Yes, absolutely. That there were things told to them, and of course that thing of like, is it the endless? What do you call it? It's when the con keeps going on. Not to say it's a con, but like when you keep on somebody's attention, be like, and then there was another message, but I can't tell you that yet because it's
right.
Are we doing a Kelly and D thing here?
Mm-hmm. We're stringing them along.
Yeah, stringing along. That is totally what it is. To the point where the prayers of Fatima that come in are added to every popular rosary. Like this is huge. This white clad Mary and the angel of peace, the angel of Portugal.
That also seems kind of common in rosary prayer, right? That they are added to by people having visions. The popular Michael rosary comes from a vision, right?
The chaplet, yes.
Yeah, the chaplet.
That's technically a chaplet, but that adding to the actual Marian rosary that is standard, of which there is technically no correct way to pray because it is a folk devotion, but there's a standard way that we understand. There's Hail Marys, there's Our Fathers, there's Apostles' Creed, there's Glory Bees, and that there's set versions of it now, especially post-textualization of these things. But that adding the prayer of Fatima on there and that praying it for the holy schools in purgatory is its own thing. But yeah, I think acts of reparation, trying to make up for things and praying for the end of the world to be relieved of the pressures of what's going to happen.
Right.
That Mary is already weeping for us what happens at Armageddon is its own kind of like Siwakwa white woman Llorona thing that comes in of like, oh my children, I can't stop what's coming. What are we going to do type of thing. My God, I believe, I adore, I hope, I love you. I ask pardon for those who do not believe, do not adore, do not hope, and do not love you. And there's recordings of her singing that prayer. So directly receiving things from the Virgin Mary, which always felt a little creepy watching the kids like run through the fields and like I remember it's either a documentary or a video of it, like watching them run and like kneeling for communion, and it just always felt a little alien, like the apparition of the Virgin Mary. There's a spot up here in the Bronx at the end of the 4 train where there was like Our Lady Queen of the Universe appeared to a guy in his garden, and it's one of the like not recognized by the church, but it is a local place of like Marian apparition specialness.
The vision of hell was so that they could. Wasn't there some line about I wish I could show that to the sinners of the world, that they would know?
Oh, that they would convert and know no peace and no joy. The other side with the third secret is that it wasn't released. That's what it was. Right. So like I think even by 2000 it was. Is it actually fully released yet? And there's just, it's one of those like conspiracies in the thing. And like Fatima becomes a prayer, a symbol of the West's victory over communism, which is godless and irreligious. So it's like, you know, the conversion of Russia in that way, and choosing, you know, that if we all pray the rosary a certain way, that all those who have died in the Great War and all those who are still falling victim to it, that we will triumph over the horrors of the World War and then eventually communism. Because Pope Palpatine like swore that it had been released, along with like there was another prophecy there, something that was released. And so you know it also fuels the New Age book industry of like, you know, what are the things. And Black Broom, awesome sculptors in Los Angeles, have a statue of the version of Fatima clad in blue where she's half skull faced, and they call it the fourth secret of Fatima, which, you know, of course I have, because they're awesome, and plus half skull faced women are going to be always there. But you know, that using everything as a vanitas reminder.
Sure, yeah. And the notion of there being, you know, the final one that we don't say gives license, you know, is a you know, somewhat of a long running grimoire tradition as well, right? The extra books of Moses, the notion of like there is another Skywalker, you know, there's another one somewhere. We're not going to say what it is or where it is, but like you might come across it if you pay close attention. Yeah,
and even I think Uthia does the like it's in Revelations in the Gospels, the third secret, which, you know, it's the world's gonna suck for a bit, and I think specifically there's she specifies like chapters, it's like 7 or 8 through 13 of Revelation as like containing key messages from relevant to Fatima. And
so it encourages people to go and gematrize and do all
exactly
that stuff.
And that the John Paul II, the John Paul II used like Revelation 12:4 or 12:5 during his homily there in Fatima. So there's like all this, it's being contextualized as a great conspiracy thing within the church, but it's also the innocence of children there, prepubescent children or women that preserve their chastity through joining the nunnery early on. There is this quality of vision that is granted to them that is considered pure. And what's interesting about that in a Marian kind of context, that it does play on the Immaculate Conception, that Mary is born without the stain of original sin, although humans are, but that is the sexual act and the breaking of the hymen that really violates female sanctity, that makes them the banished daughter of Eve, that the wall of paradise has been rent asunder and now you're cast out, you can never go back in. And there's this something with Fatima being the white-clad virgin and Thea being this prophetess at a young age, and she's a shepherdess. There's shepherd children at that. So there's like an interesting thing there. And then you think about like the, you know, getting the child to call your demons and to call the, you know, you call the demons with a crystal. And
they're pure. They're pure, so they, and not just they're pure so they can't lie, but purity isn't just, I mean, it's easy to think about, well, you want to make sure that who you're talking to is actually who you're talking to. So you do a bunch of prayers to make sure of that, but literally the the prayers and the purification of yourself is also that, you know, pure things are drawn to pure things. So it isn't just about refining the signal out of
the virgin and the unicorn.
Right. It's also about, you know, that kids have an innocence to them and haven't been told.
Have you met children? I was a teacher. Innocence. No, of course. You're also saying that it was, I think it was you, just the other night, or mentioning how it's like a pass the blame.
Oh yeah, totally. Yeah, you can literally. When the law forbids the seeing of, the telling of fortunes in various ways, or the having visions of things, or of especially accusing other people of stealing things. It's showing the client the scrying medium or surface or oiled thumbnail and seeing what do you see in it, right? I don't need to describe the thief if you already see them.
Mm-hmm.
So it's and also, yes, if you are accused of some unacceptable form of magical practice, then you can say, well, I just showed them a mirror. They're the ones that saw the thing. Which, again, given that most of the time when the Lord did get involved, it was because a client was dissatisfied.
Mm-hmm.
It's a really useful trick to be able to pin it back on the client themselves.
But I think what's interesting, besides my chair creaking, is the notion of like conspiracy and cloak and dagger and end times prophecies coming out of this very simple apparition during, not simple, but it's World War One,
right?
And it's like pray for the holy souls, and like we'll get out of this mess alive. And then there's other prophecies that are coming, and like when will it be released? And like, do we have the full thing? And her saying like, no, I wrote it to the bishop in this time, and like you'll get it later. And the memoirs and the kind of just whole side of it means that Fatima becomes a rallying point, especially in the Iberian Peninsula, for anti-communism, for upholding the Catholic traditional values, which plays into the nationalism of Spain during World War II.
Right.
And it becomes a very interesting thing of like, it's the Mary of traditional values. And that's its own interesting thing with the children seers seeing it. And I love that we can talk, as we have, about the traditional, or the traditions of child seers, of putting a child into a room and letting them see what they see, which is, corruption of a minor in a modern time period.
Sure. Especially you can think about like the charms that don't just say like, oh, get a child of a certain age and, purify them and then they'll see stuff, but literally like charms where you whisper something into their ear and then they see something. Like, this starts to feel, like a lot like corrupting a minor.
Yeah, it's, there's a few movies that have that kind of element of just like, it just becomes like, this is slightly terrifying.
Yeah. And there is there's something around the purity of the quote-unquote purity or the virtue of children to be able to see spirits, because especially like prepubescent, that like there's something, again, the idea like this old Western European idea that there's something fundamentally unclean about sex itself, and that if you haven't squandered your virtue yet, that you have more to spare to see spirits.
Mm-hmm. Also, if we take the garden, the wall, or the flaming sword of Michael metaphor, that like, if your innocence and your purity and your chastity is intact, then you're still on the other side of the veil. You're not cast out into the world cursed as Adam and Eve yet, even though we might share in the inheritance of that curse, that the preservation of your chastity, your earthly chastity, is its own thing, which I also, to compare it with church definitions of chastity, that chastity is not the same as abstinence, that chastity is correct sex, using sex appropriately. So if you were a child bride and married at age 8, then you could still be chaste because you were only having sex in the confines of marriage, which is its own interesting side of it. Justifications within justifications.
Just as assault could be, just as rape was sometimes merely sex without the permission of your family.
Yes.
Well, I mean, we can summarize this whole like childlikeness, childishness, sex, uncleanliness, war, fire of Pyrite. These do all kind of come together in Puer. It's the figure of Mars that's considered less inherently poisonous than Rubius. It's a figure of enthusiasm. I've talked about it before as it's not a common British idiom, but the idea of being stoked about something. It's a figure of great beginnings, of having enthusiasm associated with Aries and this, and thus all of that start of the year, good stuff. It's a warrior. It craves conflict and competition and combat. It's also an infamously ill-prepared figure. It's not a good figure for finishing a thing. It really struggles to stick the lining, and I think, and it's also explicitly tied to the things young men are feared to do: robbery, sexual indiscretion, sexual violence, to a certain extent, callous senses of humor. All the things that get excused as boys will be boys is definitely present in Puer. But I think that boyishness has a lot to offer in terms of looking at constructions of masculinity across European history, and also what it means to us as well. You know, for me, I'm more than happy to include, you know, spaceships, lasers, dinosaurs, dinosaur-shaped, chicken nuggets and things as like being of Puer, being both. So it straddles this line of being both childlike and childish, and also like kind of macho, but not actually macho, but macho aspiring.
Aries.
Of wanting to dress up as a
I'm
soldier.
an Aries. Let me just put that out there so that I don't get hate mail.
It's a self.
I mean, I'll get hate mail anyway, but yeah. It's the discussion of why Aries is the way it is, but the stellar fire that must launch the Earth out of winter needs to be juvenile and full of rage and hormones and argument to butt heads with nature herself and get the Earth spinning into tropical spring.
Yeah, Puer is the song of propaganda that tells young boys that it'll all be over by Christmas and they'll come back to glorious honors, and Rubius is the battlefield at the end of the song.
You're really not improving my mood with your metaphors today. We also were thinking about using this figure on a previous episode for St. Peter and sword magic and things like that, because it is the phallus, it is the sword, and graphically.
Yeah. 1,
and
1, 2, 1. Yeah.
It looks like the balls are towards the bottom, as opposed to Puella, the girl, which I'm not sure how it looks like a vagina at all, other than that, there's...
No, I mean, some people say that as 1, 2, 1, 1, the second line with 2, the second line is sometimes said to be the chest of the figure, and so the boobies. Yeah. I prefer the idea that it's...
like the tonality that you say when you say boobies is totally like... Oh, okay. Go on.
I prefer it looks to think about it more looking like a distaff. With the for spinning.
No, that makes sense. I mean, it totally makes sense when you say boobies like that. Not the way that you said it, but boobies in that context. Boobies. And that therefore, if the next one is the hips or the knees of the figure, depending on who's, that the balls are down to the knees there.
Yeah.
Like it starts to speak of that. I see that easily. I don't know why. Again, it brings up the whole veggie thing of like, why are girl and boy suddenly like large stick figures with giant boobs and giant testicles?
Well, yeah, that's the thing when in forms where it's not just the two gendered figures, in forms where Puer is more translated as child. Very often Puella is translated more as lady. So the idea that they're young is more a Puer thing in general. But yes, sometimes it's boy and girl. Puella can also be wench, can also be girl, can also be lady. I like hostess as well, or even host. If we're moving from beyond this strictly having to be essentially gendered. I like the idea that Puer, the sigils of it also often look like spearheads, which is obviously the other side of the spear side and the distaff side. A nice take on the lines of one's family and by extension one's dead.
What does it speak of to you as far as coming up prominently in a reading?
Yeah, so it as I say, at the beginning of things, often connotes that there's an enthusiasm and excitement, which can genuinely get you through not having prepared as best you could have. But that ill-preparedness towards the end of a reading, towards the, if it's second witness, that usually suggests that there's a risk of tempers flaring, or of seeking conflict where you don't need to, or of growing frustrated with a thing. Whereas all of those frustrations, there's a whole thing of wanting to fail early. Even quote unquote bad figures for the particular endeavor are better to get in the first witness, so you can see where they're going, right? And you can deal with that in order. You can take that second witness, which might be something soothing or calming, in order to remedy the initial rage and whatever of Puer. It's the common refrain throughout the house placements is good for love and war. It is a romantic of sorts. Enjoying throwing Molotovs off the barricades of a burning building.
The fighter fuck of Aries is very much there then.
Yeah, absolutely. And finding it a place to fight is good. There's also a strong component of gangs to it as well. That again, it's soldieriness. That despite being a figure that can mean risk of robbery or risk of violent crime, that if you're, or risk of, or butting heads with authority specifically, that it can also connote that if you find the right gang or the right group or the right shared identity, that stuff becomes protective, and that this irreverent figure becomes one that is good at following orders. So the idea of the young men that need a bit of discipline in their lives kind of thing is present. So certainly when it comes up in a reading and I'm looking to remediate for it, finding something for it to do, encouraging people to pursue martial arts or physical exercise are big strong ones. Either avoiding swords and iron and metal and things, or taking more of a careful interest around them.
The need for discipline is interesting because it kind of brings in the Odu of Irete correspondence of Irete, of there's a lot of butting heads and problems with authority that comes up in Irete. It's a political figure, the kind of arguments that fall and make empires collapse, as well as the need when it falls to try and really help the person understand the niceties of everyday interaction need to be developed, that politeness, sweetness, chivalry, gentlemanliness, how to sugarcoat your words, not for the sake of lying, but for the sake of understanding that it is a harsh energy that comes with you and you must sweeten. That the politeness and the rules and regulations of modern society are hiding that war machine that rages underneath and can actually satiate it enough that it doesn't manifest in a fully negative way. But there are the forces that become cultivated there eventually limit us. We think we're being free in our expression, but really what it is we're creating things that confine us to being more aggressive. They confine us to conspiracy. They confine us to a sense of worry that becomes its own energetic life. And a few people have discussed the pattern from Anakin to Darth Vader as a very Irete story of like that youthful rage of like, I am better than this and you are holding me back, but really you end up holding yourself back. Like you limit yourself so much that you became slave to your passions, to your desires, and that you end up limiting yourself based on a domino effect of things that you can't control. So that rashness, if everything was still, the thing of like, wait 20 seconds, then say hello, shake the hands. Like, yes, there's a social mask performance that must be engaged with, but that can actually help slow us down and help the manifestation of this tidal wave of things that can come in.
When are we repressing, and when are we being responsible? With the container that we put on our not just when someone says how are you being things.
Well, even if the figure is a sword, that graphically, like, swords are technically cold. It's steel, and they're forged in fire. But the thing that tempers them is that constant exposure to fire and then quenched. Right. So there needs to be this relationship of high energetic engagement followed by satiation, quenching, and the wielding of a sword does not mean that or the owning of a sword does not mean you know how to wield it.
Yeah.
And that there is a heat that can come with beheading and stabby, but that a true swordsman doesn't have to draw the sword. That expression of like, there's just a way of acting that it is a last resort. The Aikido thing of like, break the nose and walk away.
Right.
You don't need to beat a dead horse.
The responsibility that comes with carrying a deadly weapon is that you use it to de-escalate, not escalate.
So the sign has a lot of political swoop and power to influence, but it influence to what? And so therefore the character can be perverted to be about ego and that nature of it, or it can be in service of the community, which is a much harder thing, but it is something that then makes more options and more productivity and a longer lasting person. But again, it's very hard to tell that ram that it needs to butt heads less and maybe just go bathe.
Right.
So looking at this kind of foolishness of youth, the folly of youth.
Yeah.
We picked the Fool as a arcanum for the day, and the Fool is an interesting card because it is blinded by innocent desire to like just jump off the cliff into the unknown, or is that to be foolish or foolhardy or what is it that's something that raises something from fool to divine fool? And the holy fool as to what that is, that innocence is preserved despite the trauma of life. Is it just the Harlequin that is going to make its way through things through slight cunning but doesn't understand the full implications of its actions or the world around them? Or is it a complete innocence where it's just like the world watches out for the innocent?
Those cartoons with a sleepwalking person, and they wander into a building site and end up like walking down a girder, and the girder gets brought up, and they work out perfectly, because usually the world of, usually in those cartoons, some explicit figure who's meant to be looking after the sleepwalker is like, breaking their neck to try and make sure that they're okay. And they never know that all this work's been done for them, because to them they're asleep and walking through it asleep.
And there's the lore of that the bag is empty at the start of the deck and full at the end of the deck, that it goes from new to full moon, or however you want to do it. The zero is both before and after. It is the loop that the cards go through, that the whole tarot is the fool's journey.
That the sun itself is white, which, and the sky is yellow, right? The sun has emptied itself.
And the white rose, the symbolism of the white rose, which, okay, freedom from base desires is how they interpret it, but it's also the white rose is sterility in language of the flower, or like the reason it's associated with Lilith is the idea of sterility. It doesn't have the blood. And so language of the flowers, it starts to change meanings there, but the idea of freedom from base desires, also coupled with like just lack of sexual prowess. There's nothing sexual about the fool. Children are not sexual. The stick is actually reversed, and yes, it is like a giant phallus because there's a ball sack at the end. But this is the potential knowledge of what he's going to gain by going on this journey. That he's already in a place that's high, and he's jumping off the cliff, and that damn little dog nipping at his heels.
The dog. Yeah, I think of dogs as pretty poor.
Really? Why? Because of the yapping?
Yapping.
Because you're a cat person.
Both the I do clean in my own spit.
Oh, gross.
The fact that they can be ferocious and hunters, but they're also domesticated to be loyal and a bit dim in comparison to the wolves that we made them from. There's something of that big, dumb, loyal that I think is at the very least some kind of way of finding the good things about Puer and curbing its more violent habits.
I think it's interesting just the numbering of the Fool and what that is, that like the numbers of the cards are all Roman numerals, and yet there's no zero concept in Roman numerals, so it must be either unnumbered, which it was traditionally,
right,
to signify its nothingness or outside of the normal order from 1 to 21, but also that it could use an Arabic number and have a zero in its place, and that sometimes it was 22.
So it was after the world.
Yeah. Which I think is northern France and Belgiumlandia.
Oh yeah,
Belgiandia. And Waite takes it out of order when he discusses it in the book and puts it right before the world as well. But I think that's also the contrast of the world, which we've talked about, holding the scepter, which is like now it's outpoured and she's in the bag. Yeah. That is the Vesca Pisces of intersectionality and all these things, and he is holding the scepter with the bag. And that the dog, which is carnality, base animal instinct living on the streets, now becomes the quadrangle angels. That they are divine, that they are now winged, right, that these base natures become something that is now
right. And
divine.
there's that intersection of children on the one hand, not as other, they're not grown up humans, so they're both like the ape, the monkey, and the angel. They get to be the thing that we are in between. Again, that roots of duality, twinningness of childish and childlike.
Okay, so talking about the foolish art of gambling.
Yeah, I mean, gambling is one of the specific things that Puer is super into as well. I mean, especially Puer in the fifth. If you've got a really good chart and there's things coming back, that Via Puncti comes back to there, that's pretty much the only time I would advise someone to gamble. Unless it was, the classic advice about like, treat it as if you've already lost that money and then go and have a nice time. And have a firm limit about when you stop. That's one of the few encounters where Puer doesn't just like gambling, it's really good at it as well. gaming, all those other things that are found in the fifth.
You were mentioning something in our. We do actually prep for like 10 minutes and then like, look at this interesting fact. Dice towers being...
Yes!
So, I mean, this is all in a segue to dice, specifically, and dice are used for gambling and, you know, throwing the bones and their, origin from the sheep knuckle bones and all these things and the sacrifice and what that is, and then cards and dominoes, you know, evolving from dice.
Unfolded dice,
But the discussion in the research of this, of dice towers...
Yeah. So I thought they were a super new thing. I've been, watching and reading a lot more D&D and various other tabletop RPGs at the moment because I'm fucking cool like that. And looking at the way people are using these dice towers, these things that often look like literal towers, so they can double as scenery and terrain. And you throw the dice in the top, and it goes down bounces off a series of pegs or goes down some little stairs in it. And then it comes
like Plinko.
Yeah. And it comes out in a little contained space, so you're not constantly losing your dice off the table and things. And I assumed these were an incredibly recent thing and thought they were kind of a little bit surplus to requirements, shall we say. Turns out, did a bit of digging. I love those lines in movies. They date from at least the 4th century CE. And one of the explanations that was given in this JSTOR article I was reading is that it's not until the Renaissance, it's thought, that at least in Europe there was such a thing as a truly fair and balanced dice, that they were all off in some way, and that's why lucky dice are a thing, partly because most dice would end up veering towards a particular number or a particular couple numbers that they would roll more commonly than others. So the tower was a means of ensuring that it tumbled enough to give a fair read, that you couldn't, especially a 6-sided dice. There's again the link between the dexterity of the hand and the success of the gamble, right? That this is skill to a certain extent, not just knowing when to bet, but you could literally learn the not even the sleight of hand to switch dice out, but that you could get a result with a slightly weighted dice consistently enough to come out on top.
I mean, my earliest memories of thinking about dice in historical context is casting lots for Jesus' clothes. So although we don't necessarily know that lots are only dice, we know that the Romans were big dice throwers.
Sure.
And the huge, lovely conspiracy theory, Fatima-esque alignments of how a 6-sided dice is a folded cross, right?
Yeah.
So you get this even the lovely Masonic fobs and things like that roll up into a sphere or a cube that unfold into the cross.
Well, this is how Sefer Yetzirah was read as well, right? That the cube of the speaking the cube of creation, and the links to the 3 mother letters of the 3 dimensions, the 7 double letters of the sides and the center, I think, and then the 12 edges of the single letters.
I wrote a piece for my lodge long ago, Masonic Lodge, about the certain architectures of certain lodges. It's not universal, and Masonry changes from state to state here, so the architecture is not universal. But the idea of working with Sefer Yetzirah as the idea that God emanates in directions and returns to the center. So, the 6-sided die where it's, a 3 crossbar and a 4 high, when you don't have to unfold it, it's merely 6-sided, right? So if you're in the center of it, that this is the resting place that emanation creation emanates from. So going forward, back, left, right, up, down, returns to the center, and that the center of a Masonic lodge in many states is the altar, which has very Saturnine feel to it, and
this being part of your notion that Masonry is in part a very Saturnine tradition.
Yes, and it is viewed such in many diasporic traditions too, but I mean it's a memento mori tradition.
And also about physical building and the working of stone.
And
of fortification.
I mean, it's a square and compass. It's setting limits and measuring, which is extremely Saturnine. And the symbols of mortality, the Vanitas and the Chamber of Reflection traditions that come from it.
I think it's worth reflecting that. Again, I like dice because they feel both very old and very new. They feel modern to a degree, but also have been around for a really, really, really long time. In the same way I like scissors, because they feel at the one point kind of new, but also have been being used for a very long time. It's kind of, I think we think about dice, I don't know, as someone that played a lot of Dungeons and Dragons, you think about the normal quote unquote dice being a 6-sided dice. That's what, you know, most people are going to say is a dice, and that any of these other polyhedrals are weird or unusual or by extension new. And the idea of you know, the D20, the icosahedron that was discovered with the Greek letters, the Egyptian dice, which I just had to look up, was dated between the 2nd century BCE and the 4th century CE. Shows that we've been using you know, some
Dragon dice.
These yeah. We've been doing nerd shit for a really, really long time. And it also more broadly just brings up this thing around, was it gaming first and then divination? Was it divination first and then gaming?
Mm-hmm.
Do we, is it useful to think about in the same way we talk about writing? Are we reading from nature and the cracks on turtle shells that then become the words, or the accounting tokens of Babylon, etc. Is it, and this idea of trying to distinguish, was it a practical thing that then got spiritualized, or was it a hieratic thing that then got made common? I think is a daft duality, because ultimately what you're dealing with is how do things come out of, how do we introduce chance, and by extension, once we've got chance, choice and risk, and
well, that gambling and gaming is automatically linked to divination in some form, and because you're getting an answer of how to proceed, whether that is in a game that you are playing or winning things, or in life. So I mean, I think the energy is then separated in that way, in the same way that, you know, I'll still go back to Karen Armstrong and her, like, religion cannot be separated from politics. To do so is an extreme privilege to mean that your politics are representing your religious beliefs. Right. But the minute you go to a different place where, like, religion exists to justify politics, which is different from spirituality. I'm reminded of you're talking about turtle shell cracks, there was the book, was it Carved in Stone? It is what happens when a diviner priest gets a hold of what is a naturally occurring stone and sees cuneiform on it. Because it's a naturally occurring thing, but like, what are the gods trying to tell him, and freaking out over it and murdering people over it, and like, it just sets a whole thing in motion. And is it just natural?
Right. Which itself is seen as that's why it was called the Book of Nature. Yeah. It wasn't just a metaphor. You were literally meant to read. Like, most doctrine of signatures isn't about actual morphology. Lungwort doesn't look like lungs, except insofar as the markings on it look like the markings on lungs. Right? It isn't shaped like some lungs. It's not a strict morphology. It's a in terms of like literal shape.
It's looking for any connection.
Yeah, it's that there's writing on it of some kind, that there are marks on it of some kind, that there are signposts, or that there is a similitude, that it is bumpy and mottled like lungs are bumpy and mottled. Like it isn't strict shape. So reading, you were thought to be able to read words in stones. That's what angels do sometimes. Yeah,
it's fascinating to think of. I mean, the origin of a reading thing, that you're handing someone a piece of thing and they're able to interpret what you were only witness to because you can't read, and you're like, I don't know what this is. I think
I just put the facts out there. They interpret them.
It's a very I think I'm getting that exact thing from maybe Freya Oswin's rune book, of like talking about writing, and like, you know, the things that runes, which we associate with Scandinavian, is based on Etruscan letters, that once the letters are formed, it's very hard to erase what you've seen, and the novelty of being able to store information in this way. Right. And then we can get into the Semitic tradition of like it being both textually transmitted and oral transmission. The vowels aren't marked, so you still have to be told what the words are, which means you're being transmitted the word of God in some form, which is its own. See my master's thesis forthcoming. But die, I find the lore around it of the sides adding up to 7, which is, you know, 1 and 6, 3 and 4, 2 and 5, and that Western dice tend to be right-handed. They go a certain way around.
They go hands.
Yeah, and then Asian dice tend to be left-handed and go the opposite way. And that technically, I think it's Chinese die, which might the Wikipedia origin story is that they might be from India, but that 1 and 4 are red. and just to show you something different. And I mean, what does this mean? But I think of the overlap there, that this is the common dice in Asia, and the lore between 4 and death is quite interesting, and that we still, what is snake eyes?
I mean, it makes total sense with 1, right?
Uh-huh.
That's a crit fail, right? Or crit, I guess crit success.
Unless you get 2 1s, and then is it lucky because is it the snake bite, the fangs, snake eyes, the thing staring at you? Is it like you're so unlucky that the bird shot on you and now you're winning the lottery?
Right. But 4 is interesting because it's not a highest or lowest number.
No, but it's stable.
Yeah.
It's an interesting thing. But yeah, the Indian dice are 1 and 4 are red.
That's super
and that they are neighboring, right? So 1 is opposite 6. So 1 and 4 are touching.
Yeah.
So there's a place where 1 goes by 4, which also interesting.
And that's also how you fold out and get dominoes from dice.
Yes.
As the illustrious Professor Charles Porterfield is often fond of pointing out, and beginning his talks on cartomancy, such as the one I saw at the Salem Summer Symposium this year. That you once you fold a dice out, not just in totality of its, we used to call them nets as a kid, in maths class. I
love that math is plural in the UK.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, because there's more than one number, Jesse.
It's not called numbers. It's called maths.
That you're only unfolding part of them, right? The ones that are next to each other.
Mm-hmm.
So you're not unfolding the whole dice. You're getting out that 1 and 4,
mm-hmm.
and then the other ones as well.
Interesting. I mean, I don't know enough about dominoes really this is Porterfield's edging me on of gifting me with dominoes. Porterfield, if you're listening, or if you know anyone who knows Porterfield, loves to gift you with things, which is lovely, except also completely unnerving, because you're not quite sure what he's giving to you when he's doing this. So there was this occurrence at the British Unit Symposium where he was trying to give someone an apple. And I'm sorry, but I'm not going to take an apple from any magician's hand. And even, I don't care if it was a blessed apple that was
sitting on his house. But he kept telling you that you could take it of your own free will. What's not unnerving about that?
Yeah, exactly. And it was a blessed apple because it was on his prayer book. But still, it's like, come on. I see him for the first time in a few weeks, and it's like, here, take this box with a scorpion on it.
What's in the box?
Revenge.
Hail the coyote.
Yeah. But okay, so Jesus and dice and playing lots for the clothes,
which is one of the original dice are what bad people do, because that's what that's what the people who tortured our Lord did.
Mm-hmm.
Is one of those Longinus?
I don't know. I mean, he has the spear, so he becomes a saint. I don't know if he, maybe he erases his dice playing past. He's not so crappy because he didn't play craps. I'm not sure. I find also when we were in for another conference, we've been so many conferences this year. When we were in Tyrol and went to the Schloss Tyrol, the little tiny bone dice. They're very tiny. They're like a 1/4 inch by a 1/4 inch at best of bone die. And you think of them being a bone, but now they're bone plates or ivory plates or things like that. And you think about the rivets that went in, and originally the on some dice, the one being larger to counteract the fact that there's 6 on the other side. So it's the sizes is one way to try and balance die, but then they become uniform after a while, and you're like, oh, and this is why the adding up to 7 is actually doing that to try and help present some balance of weight. But the dice were teeny tiny little things, very easy to lose.
Very easy to hide, presumably.
Yes, and also just it would be sad to not mention the modern reliance, and by modern I just mean documented, and not Mammothonian, of dice as a possible use in geomancy too.
Absolutely, yeah. Which is something that both our good friend Sam Block has talked about on his blog, Digital Am Block.
He's your good friend. He's my great friend. I'm not saying anything. I just say I just love the correction of pronouns. Like, my, our, your, his, their.
A good couple folks have noticed that in the entry on geomancy, which is actually about European Renaissance geomancy as a formal divination system in Agrippa's 3 books, as opposed to his speculation, his recapitulation of monastic speculation on abstracted forms of divination based off the elements. Oh, they're just as the ancients gazed into the fire, there must be and this is pyromancy, so there must be gazing at earth, and this is a geomancy. No, the formal divination, Agrippa specifically says you can do it with dice, and then lists the tetrahedron, the octahedron, the hexahedron, which feels like a very ornate way of saying that, because that's just a quote unquote normal dice, and the icosahedron, and says you can use these for divination. He even says you can flip coins, and you can do lots, and you can do anything that generates an odd or an even number. But many geomancers I know have noted that 4 of those are platonic solids, and that these are therefore associated with particular elements. And given that there are 4 lines in any geomantic figure that are also correspondent to the elements, that one could throw a d4, a d8, a d20, and a d6, and have a figure right there generated for you immediately. It's not quite immediate because you're still reading, unless you have dice that literally have 1 point and 2 points on them. It's not the figure; it's the numbers that are odd or even that generate the figure.
Which also brings up the fact that there are actual geometric dice traditions. There's that have a full set of figures split between 2, usually it's tradition on a spindle, so that they are fixed in an order, and that by spinning them and slamming them down, that you are pulling the top half from one and the bottom half from another set.
Yeah. The first 2 lines at the top and the second 2 lines at the bottom. Yeah, exactly. And that's also a way of doing dice that literally gives you the figure in front of you.
Yes.
And gives you all 4 figures in front of you usually, because it's not just 1 dice on it, it's usually 4 dice on a spindle.
Yes.
And there's 2 of them, and you throw them, and that gives you the 4 mother figures.
Mm-hmm.
And if you're trained in the traditional Arabic forms of the thing that will be borrowed from, we'll say generously, that becomes European Renaissance geomancy, that you've trained enough that you can read, you can generate the witnesses and the judge just by remembering each of those other configurations, that you don't need to write out the whole chart and add all the things together. You have that memorized. Yeah. Which is still staggering.
So traditions of dice, irksome when dice don't go up to 6 for me, when it's 1 and 2 and 1 and 2 and 1 and 2 and 1 and 2. But there are also traditions of blank dice that have a wild card on one side. Yeah. The different numbers of dice, the different solids for sure. Also, just worth mentioning that dice divination is extremely documented as far as referring to a textual chart. So whether it's mo divination, like Tibetan, where you're throwing certain dice and it gives you a set number to look up as a lottery system of, or exactly that you're referencing line number 37. Yeah. Or the Greek sheep knuckles of throwing 5 at once and knowing that there are 4 sides to each sheep knuckle, and therefore you get a certain number that you can reference, and this is how the deity is talking to you that day. Yeah,
and that they come with a lookup chart. And obviously, ideally, you would know them all, but it's not expected immediately. Mm-hmm. And that, yes, obviously, divination literacy should mean that you have a rough idea about what's going on once you've thrown something, and not have to rely on your little white books. But equally, there are many traditions where, because of the vast number of things that you could generate, that you do the books of fate are very often like that. You get many of them in the early modern period. One of my favorites has a paper net of a D12 that you cut out and assemble together, including the little tabs so you can glue it. And this dodecahedron is thrown, and you look up that number and then that number. Then you throw the number after it. And that gives you a refining down of going through all of these tables. So the first might give you the chapter that the verse is in, then the book, then the chapter of that book, then the paragraph of that chapter, then the line of that paragraph.
You just made me think that a cootie catcher is an evolution of sheep knuckle.
Cootie catchers, chatterboxes.
Yeah. Chatterboxes that they're calling it? Okay. Yeah. That is 4 options, so you have to, which one is it, and then pick one. But it's 4 options that could be double that, because it depends on if you write on both sides of the fold. Yeah. But it's 8. Yeah, 4 to 8 or 4 to 4. Mm-hmm. But it's
cootie catchers.
Yeah. Because it was often who you were going to marry, or that type of thing. Kids would write names of people in your class and what's your favorite color? You're going to marry Al. It's binding legal agreement.
That's it. Yeah.
Let's see. Going back to our streetways. Really, the last thing is Poplar. Yeah. Okay. So I like Poplar for many reasons. It is one, it's Populus is the genus name, which, if Al wants to be obvious about geomantic associations, one could.
That is a little obvious, yeah. A little petrol.
And it is a border tree in England specifically. It was brought in and meant as a thing to like create shade screens in different parts of the property, especially the Lombardy poplar, which is from the Himalayas. Lombardy, whatever the pronunciation. Pronunciation. It's my Esperanto coming in. But black poplar, white poplar, that aspen is a type of poplar, especially in the north of England, north of the UK, excuse me. Scotland is not England, but Spain is still Europe. I'll explain that reference another time when the venom has left my lips. That aspen and white poplar are often mistaken for each other. They are shorter versions of it. They're often mistaken for birch. That there is quaking aspen in Europe, and there's also quaking aspen in the United States, which is native to the States. And poplar is an interesting one because there are many myths. By some myths, it is the mother of Pan. That Pan's mother, that Hermes, she turned into a black poplar by two different accounts. By another account, it is what the sisters of Phaeton, after he dies and crashes into a burning burning ball with chariot and everything, after he borrows Helios's, swindles his dad out of the chariot of the sun, that when he dies, the sisters warn and weep and praise their hands towards the sun, crying out like, why? And they become poplars, because many poplar species, the branches grow up, especially like Lombardy poplars do that. It's this weird lamentation thing that happens with poplars. Not all of them do that, but you can see a lot of the poplars do that upward V branch thing. So it's this lamentation that goes that way. It is associated with strength and fear, both. So interestingly, the lore of it that is, hold on, let me pull out a quote, because that's the popular thing to do. Espen tree, I prithee to shake and shiver instead of me, as a cure against palsy, but also against trembling from fear. So that taking someone's hair and putting it around the bark or the twig of a poplar tree would transfer the shaking fear to the quaking aspen. So this is
someone's got to shake, so you take the shakes off them as a quantifiable thing and install it in the tree.
Quivering tree, abbey tree, abel, owler, bitterweed are just all names for the poplar tree, the quaking tree, because there's like 40 different poplars. Bach flower remedies, it is for people who have fear and anxiety and apprehension without knowing the cause. So that this is a tree that is used to help remedy when you have an unknown source of anxiety, which for many people we know, perhaps us on many days, that kind of like dread from nowhere. Poplar is a medicine for that.
Wow.
So this is specifically what it is in the Bach flower remedies.
That's awesome, because that's such a stumbling block for people doing, and was in times I've done cognitive behavioral therapy, where it's explicitly about, it's working off like, well, let's work through what you're anxious about, and if you don't have a thing that you're anxious about, you're just generally anxious, or you can't work out where it's coming from. That's super useful. And the other side of it too, that the sisters of Phaeton are weeping. So it's the resin that comes from many of the poplars, which is a very balsam-like smell, and can be used in incense, of course. So it has solar connections. It has the mercurial connections, so that in that Hermes mates with, her name is Dryope. Dryapus. Dryope. Does that become a plant species of some kind? Is that Dryope? I don't know. I don't remember. I would have to either Wikipedia it or find something else. But I know that she is turned into a black poplar. This is from Ovid. Yeah. That when she is mother to Amphissus by Apollo. So again, the lore, it's like, always Apollo and trees, dryads. Right. But that when she is taken by nymphs, that they plant a poplar tree in her place. So she's said to have become a black poplar. That when she enters the earth, as we would say. But there's many different versions of the story. But it's also just the spreading the legs up from earth that she tries to hide and turn into something. It's either legs going up or arms going up. Oh, I see. Because of the way the poplar grows. It's headfirst into Hades. The white poplar, right, is another tree that's associated with It's white, right? It's what's her name? Luke, find it here. Luke or Luke. Yeah, like leukemia and whiteness. White poplar, which is an oceanid nymph who's abducted by Hades and transformed into the white poplar tree. But there's a dice connection with the white poplar because one side is said to be green, the other is said to be white.
Which Greek connection-wise is Heracles' fault. So Heracles wore poplar as his crown. It was his preferred tree to wear as the god of strength is wearing poplar tree. And then when he goes in, I believe the 12th labor goes to rest Cerberus, that the emanation of his god strength from his face makes the underside of the leaves turn white. And the green side is still showing their original color. But this is also the association with both worlds. It's a tree that shivers in between the worlds because the petiole? What is the part that the leaf connects to can actually go towards the sun. And so quaking aspen, especially quaking aspen in the States, it shivers. When the wind goes, it is going crazy. It looks like the whole tree is moving, almost like you're hallucinating.
Right.
So there's an interesting side of that. But poplar has a lot of connections to strength from unknown places. It supposedly is a Dionysian garland tree as well.
Okay.
I don't know much of that as much. I know that White Goddess, Robert Graves, the White Goddess is birch, but the mistaking of aspen for birch gives it a connection to this deific figure that he's proposing. But that cypress, alder, and poplar are like a trinity for Graves that speaks of resurrection and rebirth,
and putting people in the ground as well, right? When cypress is, I mean, we've gone off here a bit, but when cypress is also used in spears a lot.
Cypress, no, poplar different from cypress, but yes,
and coffins.
Eventually,
Hades connection again.
Definitely, always good Hades connection. I mean, remembering the godhood of Hercules and the sweat is like. It's the reflection of his, like the almost using it like a prism, that his sweat and the godhood is what makes it white, like bleaches it. It's just so manly. But yeah, sacred to Persephone because of this Hades connection and her relationship to being in two places at once. Any masked spirit or masked deity associated with the dead because of that, that it's bone, that the whiteness of bone is there. I also like that is it catkins? The little, like their way that the seeds grow, are sometimes called devil's fingers. So, this is not a blind, but a folk thing that when you're talking about catkins, that devil's fingers are often from poplar trees. That it's the seed of this two-faced thing that is associated with the underground and the underworld already. But I like poplar. It
seems like a lot of points of interaction with it.
It doesn't make a very good staff or wand. It just doesn't last, but it's good fresh. It's stronger when it's fresher, which maybe there's a connection there to strength and what that is, that it's not like oak, which is Jupiter, but like strength is a youthful thing. You will lose your strength, which I find interesting. And the closer rain is coming, the more that the leaves of the aspen or the poplar start to shake. So it's said to produce it. And that carrying the wood with you prevents fear, and especially fear of the devil. So I always associate poplar with that seal from Discovery Witchcraft.
Oh, yeah.
Fear nothing but God.
Yeah. And that's sometimes explicitly phrased as fear no enemy but God.
Yeah.
As well.
And then like the resin of black poplar is used heavily in post-60s formularies for giving strength and courage, which is its own thing, for sure. And there's something of Arbor Day and something going on of decorating a poplar tree, which if we ever do footnotes, I'll put it in there.
Arbor Day is Tree Day?
Yes.
Oh, cool.
It's a naturalist thing. They have it in England, I promise. I'm going to find it. 29th of May in England, in the village of Aston-on-Clun, Shropshire. Still carry out an old custom of decorating the black poplar tree that stands at the center of the village with flags. This present tree is quite young, but is said to be descended from its original tree ancestor. This is the arbor tree ceremony. Also on the calendar of trees, graves-wise, if we're talking about permutations of Om and like, I remember in the 90s it was still not popularly discussed that like Graves was just being a poet and just writing. There was no historical precedent for what he was doing. He was taking things as inspiration, and now Om is so Ogum is so inextricably linked to trees and only trees, but it was just lists of associations. So anything that started with that letter or had that letter predominantly, whether it was birds or stones or flowers or trees, but we associate it with trees because there is something that fits our need for expressing a Celtic heritage.
Yeah.
And Celtic specifically is Irish as opposed to the 13 countries that are Celtic, which is a language classification, not a cultural classification.
Yeah.
That said, that it is in the Gravesian calendar that it is associated with this time right now, so right after equinox.
Yeah.
So it was not, I did not remember that. My memory is not that good.
But it's timely.
So yeah, I think swinging it all together, right? There's Cosmas and Damian are still quite an interesting pair, with the expressions hugely so in the New World. Like this is a major saint pair in Latin America, saints in general. I find it's of interest because of the predominance of other saints around this time period. So as we go into something like autumn equinox and the neo-pagan lore and Kelly's invention of the term Mabon to like try and give classy foreign architecture to what or a classic native architecture to what is a hint of Persephone starting to go, but that also this time of year already has extant cultural traditions, whether it's Michaelmas and the I find it fascinating that we praise the archangels right as winter is coming. The first frost is around this time period. That's the blackberry lore and the devil's piss and all these things. But like there is a calendar that is one of the reasons that we have stuck to saint calendars to bring up that local lore. Yeah. And although it's weird because if we're talking tropical things of Brazil and the Caribbean, it's a completely different calendar system, and we're flipping it so that if you're in southern Brazil working with Cosmas and Damian, this is the vernal equinox. And let's not forget with that, I mean, like, is it and we're talking about Puer and this youthful push into things. Right. It's almost like what we talked about with Lucy of the last like solar push to get us through the dark night of the winter that will reappear at Imbolc, at Candlemas.
And the foresight to see that light will come.
Yeah, the capturing it in Pyrite, the carrying Pyrite around will keep you warmer. And here with this time period, this is harvest home. This is where the kaya, the last sheath of wheat, is actually taken in, and that you're keeping the wheat goat, the wheat lady, the corn lady. Whether it's Lady Medea inspired or not, that just taking her in to your house and caring for her so that she lasts the winter with you, and returning her to the fields when it is safe again. Not that you're keeping, because you can't keep her forever, but that there's this understanding that things are darkening now. And I hate to one of the issues around extreme pastoral nostalgia, fantastical escape that has plagued a lot of, especially neo-pagan community, which is still very near and dear to my heart. But the land is different wherever you are, and to ignore lore that is attached to saints is throwing the baby out with the bathwater. And it's a very American Protestant impulse to be like a Protestant impulse in general, of like, I'm throwing out anything that has any Christian taint with it whatsoever. The demons are all benevolent gods, and everything loves me. And it's like, this is not the way of the world. Right. But you can take the Jesus out of Minnesota, but you can't no, that doesn't work either. But that there are so many traditions already that express what is going on right now, and that it doesn't mean that you have to be a farmer, but there's a difference between invoking the wheat goddess in your carpeted living room versus like standing in your backyard and getting cold as you watch the constellations that are going to rise only at this time of year for you. And
it's certainly its own form of like colonialism to expect everyone in the world to behave as if it were the weather conditions of one particular place.
Crazy. And the equinoxes too are an interesting side, because this time period of what it is, the equinoxes are the least recognized or important of the neo-pagan wheel of the year as far as naturally occurring festivals around this time. We understand spring because the world is awakening, but you have a full-on like start of spring of Candlemas, and then you have like start of spring or start of summer, really, Beltane, May Day type of like, we don't know, something's happening in the middle, like something changed. And so the measurement of equal time, most people can't do this today, let alone you'd still depend on the word of mouth that like, yes, we have passed that point. And by its nature, how do you know something's equal? By knowing that the next day it isn't. So it's like the zeitgeist, the zenith, is only known by passing it. And this is one of the reasons the equinoxes would not have been celebrated in this manner, in this way. I mean, you can calculate, but it is just they are minor holidays, quote unquote. And this is the second of the three harvest festivals between Lammas and Harvest Home and Samhain. And this is very grain oriented. And you're talking about like vines versus grains, then animals, and like the things that allow us to last through the winter.
Which is why, why so many harvest festivals? Don't you only need one? Well, it depends what you're harvesting.
Yeah.
Hate.
Pain. But I think there's also, following off on this kind of ancestral connection and what Catholicism is that many of our ancestors were Catholic for a very long time. And when we deal with the dead, whether or not they were believers in Catholicism, we were dealing with a calendar that is somewhat universal proposal, where a child of colonialism for sure, and the Catholic Church being the original Western hemispheric like force of conquer and bring into the fold.
Sure.
But it means that there is a universalism to cultural traditions that happen around this specific calendar.
It behooves us to attempt to speak in a manner that those we speak to can understand.
Yes.
And in building that bridge back to and keeping those bridges alive with our dead, it's useful to understand how they would understand the world and to speak in their words when you're speaking to them. To be able to at least code switch, right?
Yes. And if Cosmas and Damian are the patrons of the medical art, and by extension perhaps even a little bit of like alchemical patrons in that way, why is alchemy done in pairs? It wasn't done by people by themselves, because if you have to have something boiling for 3 days or 3 weeks, you need to sleep. And while you're asleep, you could lose a year's worth of ingredients or your life. If it, all labs explode. Best advice I ever got from one of my alchemical teachers. But like the idea that there's a partner that you were going to do this project with. And this everything is better in pairs, which reflects the Abeji mentality, which reflects the like children seek a friend, and we do this thing together. It is fine. You have your own world that you live in, but then you have a doll that's with you, or you have a real friend that is like sharing in the make believe with you, changes it, and makes it even more real.
Oh, God's the difference between a vision or a transmission from a spirit on your own, and when you look at your fellow that you're working with and are like, did you just hear that as well? Or let's say at the same time what they just said. Like that.
Write it down and look.
Yeah, that is astoundingly more impactful and real, for want of a better term.
And the notion of hysteria in vision is a common thing, that public hysteria drives vision forward. And I think about this in terms of like, it's a rough transition, but in seances and in misas, of like the evidence that starts flowing, when it is considered a good thing when people start agreeing, say like yes, and then this, and then this, so the person finishes a thing and another person latches onto that current and is starting to give more evidence on the same thing, and everybody's talking about it. It's not just like, I see this person behind you. It's like, yes, and they're wearing this color, and yes, and they were born on this day, and like...
It should be a collaborative effort.
Yes, that kind of current, the corriente should flow. And that type of thing, it also feels a little bit like, hyenas pouncing on something.
Right.
But that is its own part and parcel of the tradition of like, this is how evidence is found, evidencia.
And your keeps the thing going.
Yes, as opposed to, no, I don't see that. So I'm going to talk about what I saw.
And then there's all sorts of like other things around blocking, right?
Yeah.
Not crossing arms or legs or things of that nature. Or deliberately doing that if you're trying to stop something happening.
Yeah, or even like Espiritismo with Cordon, where you're holding hands and singing for hours. You do not let go. And then everything flows in that way. And that's its own thing. I mean, like, I don't want to hold hands with someone for 2 minutes, let alone longer. That says a lot about me. So we have our own propensities towards the sorcerer saint during this time, and there's been a lot of important. September is an interesting month, diasporically, and just just traditions in the New World. September is you're getting to this. The storm season is still there, but like to have just Caribbean wise of Caída do Cobre, Virgen de Regla, moving in towards. Cosmas and Damian, the Virgin of Mercy on the 24th, which is syncretized with the Batala, having Cyprian of Antioch and Cyprian of Carthage so close together with 9 days between them, having
Cyprian and Justina as well.
Cyprian and Justina, yeah. Again, so the Hildegard on the 17th, which she's a new saint, but still very, very much there. And I love me some Hildegard, who is in recent discussions with people is still, and we've mentioned her before. But
as a magician,
that's right. And we've talked about that kind of guilt thing that she does, but like I love that as a saint now, that friends that are working with her, you realize like she's not unlike Cyprian in some ways. Like I think that again, the quote from the VGS, that one's just showing the mentality of like, if she had been alive 400 years later, she would have been accused of witchcraft. But witchcraft was not invented yet. Yes, that is correct. Witchcraft was not invented yet in the West. And so they gave her power and validated her experiences to drive people to the church. Yeah. But as far as a crime, witchcraft, which is not a religion, which is not a spirituality, it is a political accusation, had not been invented, and therefore you could not take away her power in the same way.
Right.
If you can't shut them up, join them and get butts in the seat. But like the nature of herbalism and what that is that there's this idea of it as being less than in the West now, specifically America. But that it is an extremely violent thing to just go and rip plants parts off and grind them down and do things and save them, and that there's this overlap between plant, stone, and animal that starts doing when you're going in that mentality, that it isn't this lovely strict vegetarian thing, that it's that this classification is almost external to those that are involved in the forest and the greening power. Yeah. And the greening power seeks to grow and push things and breaks things. Poplar, for instance, going back, apparently caffeine set in, but poplar is not good if you have a small garden because it will break the pipes and the concrete. The roots are very strong.
Okay.
Speaking of strength, interestingly. So maybe it's the trembling leaves, but the roots are strong.
And the strength you don't see.
Yeah, it's very interesting.
And you only see by its...
That's good. That's very good. So I don't know with Cosma and Damian, it's just this little bit of children. The potential there is so interesting. Yeah. The lives they didn't leave if they're dead already, but also the potential of any child, of what that is, and the caretaking, like notions of ancestor veneration and moving us forward into the future,
and getting to see the world like a kid did through their eyes again, getting to fall back in love with childhood books and that kind of thing, getting to go to being allowed to eat more dessert than you think you should be allowed to.
Even the shift in innocence we talk about sexuality wise, but like when dice turn from gaming to gambling, this is a loss of innocence. Like no one questions a 3-year-old or a 5-year-old with dice. 3-year-old's a little young because I don't think they can use them. But like a 5-year-old playing, you're like, oh, it's Candyland. And if they're 15, like they're throwing craps.
Yeah.
And it's the shift happens.
Yeah. And in fact, that was given as a famous example of a thing I was watching recently, how the gambling industry has rebranded itself the gaming industry. Because one of those is something that's fun, and one of those is something that has such a long history of being either explicitly called evil or the thing that ruins a household through addictive behaviors.
Lots of resources, yeah.
Lots of resources, yeah.
And also, obviously those weren't separated until the 20th century, probably. Right. That anything, and even like playing at cards, if men do it, it's gambling. If women do it, it's joy and distraction.
Yeah.
And eventually divination.
Patience, right?
Well, and eventually divination even. Right. Of like parlor games, that the women are in their parlor doing their things, and they'll never know that we're doing this thing, and then the little white book comes out and it goes, and it's like we're talking about what comes first, divination or gaming in that way, but it's still the game of destiny. Like it's even the Norman following thing there of what's the difference? Right. What's the mental shift that goes from gaming to gambling and gambling to gaming again? You're still wanting to win. Yeah. Is it this substitute for war that we have? Is it the Puer influence?
The thrill of victory, right? Yeah.
Like, is it the ram rutting? Yeah. That is it innocent or is it
this is all very fifth house, right? Nati, the house of children, also the house of gaming, and of pleasures and of developing skills.
Interesting. The fool developing his skills by being present through all of the cards of the tarot.
Letters and messages that aren't too far away or too close.
The seers, Three Child Seers, so prophecy and writing things down to be delivered by people that have more authority and recognition of the context. Yeah. That's very interesting. Pyrite and the fool's gold that is actually of value on its own. Yeah. Like a child's advice, a child's vision of something is not invalid because it's a child. Right.
Right. It's not a fake version of something else, it's a real version of itself.
Yeah. Is this real? Do you not see it? Do you mean as opposed to imaginary, or is it what you thought it was going to? Like this shift is very interesting. It happens all the time for anything in magic, right? Like I'm sure every store owner is familiar with like, does this really work? Like, or is this just an elaborate Harry Potter store? Like that type of thing is very interesting.
What do you think of this?
Yeah.
Like, Yeah, it's such a weird question.
Yeah, or vending it in recently, just after the second child cried in the first hour, it's like, okay, what is a different clientele?
Then you put your clothes back on.
Yeah. Shh. Rude. Here's some olive oil. What am I thinking, Al? Put it on your fingernail. Anyway. All right. Well, I think that's a good synthesis of the day. Happy feast of Saint Cosmas and Damian.
Feast.
Happy Serguthal.
Mm-hmm.
Sergutharim. May you be as strong as Poplar's roots and shiny as Pyrite, and
the dice look favourably
yes.
on you.
And may you always be have the opportunities of the fool, but none of the folly, I suppose.
Yeah.
May all your fools be holy. And go from there. And if you see a vision, please send a letter to the Pope and let him release it 40 years later just for the drama. And past that, I hope this finds all of you well, in good health and spirit, and if not, better luck next time.
Radio Free Golgotha out!
Good night, and get out.